I want to say Abarigani, but this isn't Kwanzaa. So, but my name is Kwaku Larry Franklin Crow. I took the Kwaku on in 2015 as a member of the Dayton Africana Elders Council. And we have some of our members sitting here. Can you raise your hands? Yeah. And give them all a hand. Dayton Africana Elders Council, Nation Builders and Warriors, they're here. And so I was born on and raised on the west side, born on Mound Street. We were in 2 rooms, I think it was 7 of us in 2 rooms in 1949 when I was born. We slept on a rollaway bed with my grandmother, my brother and I did, in the kitchen. But we moved on up. My dad got one of those General Motors jobs, and he was a World War II vet. Had a lot of stories about Germany and Okinawa. I can tell you all kind of. Dad was a great storyteller. Had Crow's Barbershop for many years. He did that as well as work for General Motors. So a lot of people, a lot of the well-known black people in the community would come to get their hair cut. So I'd be in there sometime. I'd listen, see what they were talking about. We had. But I went to Weaver School, Jackson, Weaver School, and then to Roosevelt for the first semester of school. Then I went to Fairview. And I was like an anthropologist at Fairview because I was one of the only black students there, and I was like walking around looking at the Beatles had just come out, and I was a fish out of water, really, at Fairview. And Wright State University is where I met William and Linda Gillespie, Carolyn Wright, all these, we had a great organization. Tom White was a civil rights organizer. He was a grad student there, and I followed him around. He'd go meet with President Golding, and I was a freshman. I'd go with him and sit and listen, and find out. And finally, we issued demands in 1970. We got the Belinga Black Cultural Resources Center, which was a grand thing in 1971. And it's not at its full strength today. But in 71, it was a monster. And we were there under the tutelage of Dr. Yvonne Chappelle, who's now Dr. Yvonne Sion. She's the mama of Dave Chappelle. And I'm telling you, knowing her, I don't really know Dave that well, but I know her. And it's really been rewarding to know her over the years. She's still in Yellow Springs. Dr. Arthur Edward Thomas was the second director of the Belinga Center. He went on to become the president of Central State University. But, so that's somewhat my background. I moved to Chicago in 1977. I worked for the Institute of Positive Education of Thirlwell Press. Not a lot of money in any of that. Beginning in 2002, I became an interviewer with the History Makers Archive. The History Makers is a national project out of Chicago. It's an African American video oral history project. And we've interviewed over 4,000 people, and there are about 3,500 on our website, and it's accessed through subscription by public libraries and universities all over the country. So I'm getting ready to go to Denver Sunday to do a week of interviews. But we did a week here in Dayton where we interviewed Mr. Bing Davis, we interviewed Margaret Peters, we interviewed Raleigh Trammell before he got in trouble. We interviewed Ms. Laverne Ski, Dunbar House, and we spent a week here doing interviews. Darnell Diggs, who's a physicist out at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So that's my background, and there's more even, but it's like I've always been interested in history, and so I hang out with people like William Gillespie and Rosalie Bradley and other people who like to talk about history and culture and that sort of thing. And so it's through filling my head with all these facts about Dayton that I, came to this project. I guess Anna McGuire, I don't know what made her do it, but she asked me to be an author of this, and I've never written a book before. I've written a pamphlet, and this is a booklet, I guess. But I'm really grateful for the opportunity because the deadlines pushed me to actually finish it. And this project got me into a project with my lovely wife, Olabisi Olakolade, who's from Chicago, spent 40 years in Florida, She has a law degree, but for 40 years she was the head of an African-centered school in Orlando, you know. But I'll let her talk about herself in a second. But that's our background. That's how we got involved in this. Olabisi.
Well, I don't need to tell you everything, but as it relates to the book, someone asked me, how did you and your husband get along writing this book? Yeah, we're still married. But what you have is before you an educator and a historian. And if you really think about it, that's a match made in heaven. Okay? People who love to read since they were this small. I mean, I do have a lot of degrees. I have a degree in sociology, a degree in psychology, a degree in law. I studied languages and culture at the University of Madrid. I studied health and other systems in the People's Republic of China. You know, I had a lot of experiences, but we're both, he's 75, I'm 74, I'm getting ready to be 75. So we're at this point where you have this life of activism, but you have to write. You have to write because you love reading. Okay, you love reading, and when you love reading, you see that you have to write. So when we got together on this project, my husband, who is a brilliant historian, started working on this timeline. Yes. Joyce is laughing because we would have a lot of team meetings discussing the project, and we really wanted to push it, you know, to the next level. And we kept having these meetings about the outline because this man is so serious about his history. So when we were working together, it was like an outline, very specific, in chronological order of the history, and not starting in the 1800s. It's starting when the first African was kidnapped from Africa and brought here. Okay? And it started before that. So that outline became the skeleton for the body of the work. So where his forte was the outline, the structural history, I came in to put the flesh on the bones. In other words, we have heroic people in Dayton, Ohio. And a lot of the Black heroic people have been ignored by history. Okay? I'm not the type of person that believes in color blindness. No. Let's take off our blinders and let's see each other. Let's see each other's color. Let's see each other's culture. You know, and more so the culture because, you know, the color is a short conversation. I'm Black. I'm white. The conversation's over. But when you start talking about the culture, then we start to talk about, well, we eat this food and this is why we eat it. And this is what our ancestors created. These are the clothes that we wear, and this is where this came from. These are the ideas that we have, and we do things this way. We dance this way. We walk this way. We talk this way. We begin to really get to know each other. So it was not acceptable that so many Africans, Black people, African Americans were left out of history. And we had a particular problem that we faced because in our school systems, you have a Black History Month. That's when you're going to learn the most about Black history, in that one short month of February. And you're going to learn about the same 10 people. Every year, the same 10 people. So in approaching the book, it was very important to us that, okay, you know about Sojourner Truth, but what about Charity Brody? What about Charity Brody? Charity Brody went to a suffragist convention where Sojourner Truth gave the Ain't I a Woman speech. She came back to Dayton, Ohio, and started the Montgomery County Suffragist Association that very same year. We needed to hear more about her. Okay? We hear a lot about Frederick Douglass, one of the greatest abolitionists ever.
Right.
But what about Martin Delaney, that's buried out there at Massey's Creek Cemetery with his family, that had such a tremendous impact on us, was a multi-level genius. And I kept finding multi-level geniuses doing the research on Dayton, Ohio. That's right. Charles Young, he's always touted as a military man, but he played the violin. What else did he play? Piano, violin. He wrote a play on the Haitian Revolution. These people, he got on a horse. Hold on a second. He got on a horse when they told him that he wasn't fit to be in the military because they didn't want to put him in a rank that would put him over white soldiers. Okay, so they said, well, you're not fit. So he got on a horse and
Rode from Wilberforce to Washington, D.C.
hello.
Right. Right.
So when you look at this book, you're going to find a lot of that history. It's in here. And we didn't write a colorblind book because you can't tell the history as it happened. You cannot tell the truth in a colorblind book because specific things were happening to black people, specific things were happening to white people, and we told it all. When Charity Brody sought to be taught medicine by Dr. Hibbert Jewett, who was a white doctor and abolitionist here in Dayton, she was risking her life and he was risking his life. When he invited another abolitionist to come and speak at his home, a white mob in the community threw rocks at his home and threw rotten eggs at his home. You could be arrested for assisting African people, black people, colored people on the Underground Railroad. So we wanted these heroes to really come forward.
Thank you. You see, where we're speaking from the heart, actually, that's a good way to put it because we didn't prepare a script either. So, so what we've got here, this is the cover by, our great artist, James Pate. James, stand up. Yeah, he has a gallery on West 3rd Street, right next door to Bing Davis's gallery, at Ebonea Gallery. So we got a little arts community growing there. But this is a piece called Io's Chair, named after his son. And there's an explanation in the book of what the painting is all about, the drawing is all about. Let's see what's our next, see if I can get this thing. Okay. This, I started this project from back, I guess about 20 years ago, working on a slide presentation I used to do around town. And this is when Margaret Peters was still alive, Mr. Austin was still here. They encouraged me, and this is like the cover for that, but basically. This book is dedicated to Robert Rice. How many remember Robert Rice? Yeah. Robert Rice is one of the cousins of Paul Laurence Dunbar, and he was the black historian of Dayton for many, many years. I heard him speak at Wright State. I heard him speak downtown. And there's one of the programs, the pluggers for his appearance at the courthouse back in '76, Mr. Robert Rice. We used to live in a home, believe it or not, that his father was shot on College Street. When I was 4 years old, we lived in a home on College Street, and his father, Lucius Rice, the sergeant in the third black man in the Dayton Police Department, was actually killed there. Robert Rice. Then Charles Mosley Austin. We're dedicating it to Charles Mosley Austin. That's in the book. Charles Austin was a veteran who he drank a lot, he smoked a lot. When you appear in a library, people would want to throw him out. But there's no more dedicated historian than Charles Mosley Austin.
Yeah.
And his books were kind of homemade, but the information is all good. There's boxes of information and files out at Wright State, University of Dayton, that Charles Mosley Austin created, one of the great historians. Yeah. So you see the headline there, his efforts bind Dayton blacks, you know. And lastly, we're dedicating this to Margaret Peters. That's in the book, because you can't do this without, touching on our ancestors and giving praise to our ancestors. Margaret Peters, one of the great historians in our history. In 1969, Ebony published the Ebony Book of Black Achievement by Margaret Peters from Dayton, okay? And when I would see it in Chicago, I'd say, a sister from Dayton wrote that, Just like my grandmother would say, Snooky Young is from Dayton. He's on the Tonight Show band. Dayton has got this magic kind of quality about it. You always see Dayton people doing things. But Margaret Peters was truly dedicated. She was founder of the Dayton chapter of the Association for the Study of, African American Life and History, ASALH. And we owe her a lot. She was a member of the Dayton Africana Elders Council as well. This is James Pate next to, what's the name of this piece, James?
It's called Middle School Revolt.
Middle School Revolt. Middle school, middle passage, middle school revolt. And that's in the book. Why this book? Olabisi?
Writing about Black history of Dayton was an honor and a revelation. The truth reveals a history of so many firsts and so many heroes and heroines. Although we included the familiar greats that we read about everywhere, we wanted to highlight the Dayton greats who were so important locally, nationally, and internationally. I felt that the heroism we highlighted in extremely disastrous circumstances. When I say disastrous circumstances, thinking of circumstances like the flood of 1913, okay, where water is 2 stories over your head, okay. In that flood emerged another hero, W.S. Sloan, whose descendant is right over here, Wanda Sloan. There she is. Thank you, Wanda. But these stories are like movie quality. You're talking about a flood that was one of the most disastrous events in this country. He thinks about his 1-year-old son. He wants to save his life. He doesn't want his son to drown. He wants to save other people. He goes to a place where he remembers there was a boat, and he asked the owner if he could take the boat and rescue people. The owner says no. So he had to make a crucial decision in a desperate time. He decided to commandeer, take the boat at gunpoint. Yes, this is real life history. So he takes the boat, he and a friend, they go and in that day, in treacherous water, rescued 317 people. Yes. One of the first person he rescued was his son. The last person he rescued was the boat owner. Yeah. Oh yes, thank you, Kwaku. He was also a pitcher, southpaw, for the Dayton Marcos. And that's a whole nother history that we talk about in the book. Okay, it seemed very important to us for young people to know that Africans resisted slavery until they effectively ended it as a legal institution. And, you know, really, Kwaku told me about Martin Robeson Delaney's speech at the Brick Church, where he told the black people who were gathered there, you won the Civil War. You ended slavery. You ended your enslavement. Do you know that? You ended your enslavement. He made that point. This is a man that traveled to Africa, talked to the Alake of Abeokuta, tried to find places for African people to live, to immigrate from here so that they could live without being lynched, murdered, run out of town, burn up. Yeah, because those things were happening.
Just on that, the Brick Church she's talking about is the Brick Church in St. Helena, South Carolina. Delaney was there as a major with the 104th United States Colored Troops. And in giving this speech, I mean, we know what he said because 3 separate white lieutenants wrote down the script, you know, of what he said. They transcribed what he said. And they all pretty much match. But what he meant was, he says, did you know that you freed yourselves from slavery? Meaning that if you hadn't resisted slavery, you'd still be a slave. If you hadn't run away, if you hadn't like tricked the master, if you hadn't, you know, a lot of things that people did, join the Union Army, you picked up a gun, you know, if you hadn't like tripped somebody who was on their way to help the Confederacy or whatever. He said, you know, if you hadn't resisted, you'd still be enslaved.
Right.
So let's. So when we were writing this, we were writing it from a standpoint that everybody needs allies and stuff like that. But I wasn't writing it from the standpoint of being grateful. Though I know that a lot of white people helped, you know, and they ought to be raised up. They're the last ones to get raised up in this country. It's the slave owners. Every colony, every one of the 13 colonies was a slave state in 1776. Every one of them. And it wasn't until 1777 that Vermont became a free state. You know, so, I mean, this is what we're looking at. And the condition of black people, we wanted people to know, well, that goes into the questions I wanted to answer. Why this book? One was provide answers to recurring questions that I always had when I was a kid coming up. People would say, you know, black people would say, black people can't do nothing. Oh, we're going to be late. Oh, this is going to be a colored program. Oh, this is going to be this and that. I mean, you heard all kinds of disparaging things about black people from black people. Then you go to church and on the wall, Jesus got blonde hair and blue eyes, you know. We had 2 pictures of him until I found out that nobody knew what Jesus looked like. You know, I mean, I had to get older to figure that out. So we internalize what we see in popular culture, and it doesn't encourage us. Let's put it that way. It doesn't encourage us. But if we knew what we actually did and what our ancestors faced, we might have a more balanced view of how to go forward. And you know, some people don't even need a balanced view. I've interviewed people amongst the history makers. They don't care what anybody says. They just go on and do it and do whatever it is they're going to do. Despite they said of Martin Delaney that obstacles placed before anybody, a normal man, would be easily knocked aside by Martin Delaney. He really didn't care. But a lot of people do. We live in a sensitive world. People, respond to that. So I wanted to dispel a lot of those myths about, like, first of all, we weren't immigrants. We didn't come here as immigrants. We came here chained up. And we weren't slaves. We were African people who were chained up and brought over here. Okay? So that's different. As a so-called free Negro in the North was not free. Not really. You had to, first of all, if you came into Ohio, into the Northwest Territory, you had to pay a bounty of $500 or get a white man to pay it if he's going to employ you. But you had to have free papers on you, a bona fide free papers. If you didn't have any papers and you couldn't find anybody to pay the $500 bounty, which a lot of people wouldn't be able to pay now. They'd have to leave Dayton. They don't have $500. So, I mean, that's the first thing. Then you have to, you had to, if you got in trouble, you couldn't testify against white people in court. So if you got a chance to own something or to do something, it's hard to keep it because somebody else might want to take it. And if they can take it without any, they might. So, yeah. So it's all those kind of things. So when we wonder, like, why haven't we gotten any further than we've gotten? Well, we kind of held down a little bit, and we don't seem to realize that. So I wanted to make sure that's clear. The strength of this book, I tell you, is the part, the early days of Dayton, that a lot of it we just don't know. As I said before, Dayton's kind of a magical place that my introduction to Black history was at the House of Knowledge. Actually at a card game that at Wright State, where Rosemary Young, Clarence Young III's sister, and Connie Woodruff told me that the ancient Egyptians were black. And I said, come on. Everybody's seen Cleopatra, but. So I went to the House of Knowledge, our black bookstore. I'd been in there once before, but I came in the store and I bought a book called Africa's Gift to America by J.A. Rogers. I didn't know who J.A. Rogers was, but for many, many years in Dayton, Mrs. Charleste Johnson used to live in the castle on Jerome. Remember the castle? How many of y'all remember the castle on Jerome, this big Victorian house? She used to bring J.A. Rogers as the Emancipation Day speaker at Dayton. He would speak at the fairgrounds, and then they'd have a candlelight dinner at the castle. And he would talk about his work. Rogers wasn't just one historian by himself. He was a part of the Harlem History Club in New York City. He and Willis Huggins, John G. Jackson, John Henry Clark, they would all get together and talk. Zora Neale Hurston, Ella Baker was there, in and out of that circle. And then they would meet at the Y in Harlem. I mean, Rogers traveled all over the world gathering information, and it's a decent book. I also bought a copy of Basil Davidson's The African Past, which is documentary sources about African history, about what Arab writers and European writers and other people said about Africa in ancient and medieval times, with complete proof, as J.A. Rogers used to say. So you could go and double check, and I would double check stuff, So that's W.S. McIntosh, House of Knowledge, lasted for about 10 years. Okay, these are some of our sources, and we're wrapping up now, but these are some of the sources. The newspaper articles, the Dayton Forum, Derek Forward just mentioned the name of the fellow that founded the Dayton Forum. What was his name? I forget. Where's Derek? Is he gone? No. It was, he's got his friend. Anyway, Rives, John S. Rives, founded the Dayton Forum newspaper. So newspapers.com has a lot of the old Dayton forums. So that ad for Dahomey Park there. People like Moses Jones, Moses Moore. There's a picture up there of Florence Tate. Yeah, Florence Tate. Some of the books of Charles Austin. There's Jesse Gooding's book. There's a book about Catherine Magnolia Johnson. Edgar's Pioneer Life in Dayton. Ms. Peters' books. the book about, there's a book about the flood here, about black people in the flood by a guy named Johnny Freeman, who's still alive. He goes to Mount Eden Church. Wrote a great book about how black men were sent in from Chicago to clean up the flood, and then they stiffed them for their money. They didn't pay them. But that's a picture of the timeline. And these are, you know, some of the bibliographical sources. You can't really see much of them, but there's a lot of them. And the timeline, of course, is not all in here. That's why we have to do another book or do some other projects. It's like 80-something pages now. It's still growing.
Thank you. I just want to close with two things. One is that we got to encourage reading, okay? Right now, everything is screens, social media, teaching us to be antisocial. This book is directed towards middle school and high school students, and it's interesting to adults. So let's find ways to read it together. Let's find ways to read with the young people that we know, whether they're in our family or in our church or a reading group that we form. It is very important for us to be able to give our youth a context to enjoy reading. Because right now, they're going to the library, but they're not reading. Let's show them what you're supposed to do with books. You know, let's be that example. I think that can have so many positive, results. The other thing is, do the story behind the story. Research the things that you see. Look up the articles, because I guarantee you there were a lot of fascinating things that we found out that couldn't be included in the book because it's just too much. But you can go down that rabbit hole and you will really enjoy it. So those are my two things. Thank you.